here's the question. What did Margaret Thatcher say to George Bush Sr.? Like, was it really that good a sex? Like, what was it that happened between them in Vale, Aspen, Telluride, wherever that was, he's a Hitler? And then, here's what I think happened. I think there was a bunch of things. One thing is Kuwait was a British colony before it got its independence. And I think she saw it as, that's more erosion of the British Empire. How can I turn that around? I think another thing she thought was, the US has always wanted to have an air base in Saudi Arabia. And we did, we had one until the Saudis kicked us out because they got mad at us for supporting Israel so much. And so I think she went to him and she said, we want Kuwait back in the British sphere of influence, but we think you can get Saudi Arabia back in the US sphere of influence. We think that if you go to war against Iraq, you can, because the Saudis wanted it. The Saudis were begging us. You could tell the Saudis, we'll do it, but you fund the war. You'll pay for it. I believe the Saudis gave us $9 billion to do the war. You fund the war. And on top of it all, we get a permanent air base in Saudi Arabia. And I think that's how she talked them into doing it. And then there's another thing. There's all these weapon systems we've never tested. We could test them now, find out if they work. And then another thing that we have is in the United States, our military has to regularly get rid of its equipment. We actually have to dispose of it. That's very expensive. It's much cheaper to press a button and launch the thing. So we could take all that equipment that we were going to have to dispose of anyway and just fire it. I really think that's how shallow the decision-making got in Colorado. Next thing you know, we're going to do Desert Storm, where we turn the defense, we're defending Saudi Arabia. We turn that into, we're going to obliterate Iraq. The bombing campaign that ensued was 4 or 5 weeks long. In it, we dropped more tonnage of explosives on Iraq than everything used in World War II for the entire 8 years, including the 2 nukes. Let me say that again. The 8 years of World War II fought on 3 continents. Right? Europe, Africa, and Asia. All the explosives that were dropped in World War II, including the 2 nukes dropped in Japan, did not amount to the same tonnage of explosives that we dropped on Iraq in that 4 or 5 weeks of the air campaign. We smashed Iraq into the Stone Ages. We blew up their hospitals, we blew up their schools, their police stations, their government buildings, their formula factories, their pharmaceutical plants. We blew up their bridges. We smashed Iraq. And then we attacked it. 5-day ground campaign. We hooked up, we headed toward Basra. The day that the ground campaign started, Saddam Hussein sent out a communique to George Bush Sr., we surrender. George Bush Sr. said, no, too late. He sent out another communique to George Bush Sr., we surrender. Bush ignored it. He sent a communique to the Soviet Union, to Mikhail Gorbachev, and said, hey, we surrender. There's no point in fighting. We can't win. We surrender. Mikhail Gorbachev called up George Bush Sr. and said, on behalf of the Iraqi people, I'm offering a surrender. And Bush said, no, we're not taking it. No surrender. Saddam Hussein ordered the troops in Kuwait to run away as fast as they could. They confiscated every vehicle they could find, cars, buses, flatbed trucks, and they took off on the Basra highway from Kuwait. Thousands of soldiers. And then we came in, I believe primarily with A-10s, but there might have been other equipment, and we dropped incendiary bombs all across the highway and just burned them to death. If you want, you can do a Google search and you can see a bunch of burnt Iraqi corpses, because there were photographers who went and took pictures. So you don't have to take my word for it. By the time it was done, we probably killed around 100,000 Iraqi civilians and probably somewhere around 85,000 Iraqi soldiers in 5 days of ground war following 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks of air war. And then we withdrew. The Egyptian army was in command of capturing Kuwait. US, French, and British forces went through the Iraqi desert on the way to Basra. We took Kuwait, and then the Allied forces withdrew from Iraq. And that was it. That was the war. Saddam Hussein was ordered to renounce Iraq's claim to Kuwait, a long-standing claim, right, since it had been part of the Basra province before the British managed to carve it out of the Ottoman Empire in 1900. And Iraq did temporarily. Then, a few years later, it actually it said no, we take our claim back. But temporarily, anyway, they took the claim away. Shortly afterwards, George Bush Sr. got on TV and announced to the world, he doesn't, not even bother talking to Saddam Hussein, right? He announces to the world that all Iraq has to do to get back into the community of nations, because he doesn't know the meaning of the word nation, get back in the community of nations, is to give up its weapons of mass destruction. Now everybody knew what they meant, what Senior meant was that he had to give up the chemical weapons that the US had supplied Iraq. And so Saddam Hussein did. He took all the chemical weapons and he put them in the desert. He had the army take them out in the desert, different locations, and blew them up. In August, he blew them up. Takes them out in the desert and blows them up. In August of 1991. He blows up all of it as far as we know. 100%. Well, the UN weapons inspection regime shows up shortly afterwards, and really early on, one of the guy who ends up in charge of it is a guy named Scott Ritter, who had been a Marine, a US Marine. He's a self-proclaimed conservative Republican. He goes to the Iraqis and goes, okay, show me your weapons of mass destruction. Well, first of all, chemical weapons are not weapons of mass destruction. That's wrong. Biological and nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction. Chemical weapons are more of a combat terror weapon because they're really scary, because they do horrible things like burn your lungs, right? But they don't necessarily kill in large numbers any more than conventional weapons do.